Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted and so honored that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Ghana, Himalaya, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is my neighbor from Boston, Lisa Stringfellow. She is here to celebrate A Comb of Wishes, her debut middle grade novel. Before we invite Lisa into the studio, we want to invite you to visit our merchandise page. It's readingwithyourkids.com/merch. We can go there. You can have your very own Reading with Your Kids t-shirt. We have a number of different designs that would look absolutely fantastic on you. We also have a Reading with Your Kids mugs, a Reading with Your Kids face mask if you want a souvenir of the pandemic era. All sorts of great stuff. It's a wonderful way to support the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Also, when you get to readingwithyourkids.com, you can sign up for our free newsletter or use the contact button at the top of the page to send us a message. Let us know what we're doing right. Let us know what we could be doing better. Let us know who you would like to hear on the podcast. Join us right now for one of the most beautiful neighborhoods in the entire world, the beautiful neighborhood of Hyde Park, right here in the city of Boston. We're like we could go out and meet at a Dunkies and have this conversation. Our guest today is here to celebrate A Comb of Wishes. Please welcome to the show the author and my neighbor, Lisa Stringfellow. Hey, Lisa, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Jed, for having me.
You know, we if it wasn't for the pandemic, I would have suggested that we met at a Dunkies and had this conversation.
That would have worked for sure.
But the hard thing was, which one would we have picked? Because there's probably 35 of them between where you live and where I live.
And yes, it's very funny because when I did not live in the state, I lived in Kentucky, I could hardly find one. And now that I'm back in Boston, there's one every 50 feet, it feels like.
It really is. It's I'm always amazed at how they're able to stay in business and make a profit because there are so many of them.
Yes.
So let's talk about A Comb of Wishes. Tell us all about this book, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Comb of Wishes is my middle grade debut. It just came out about 2 weeks ago, and it features a 12-year-old girl named Keela, and she is dealing with a lot of heartache at the beginning of the novel. Her mother has recently passed away, and she's trying to distract herself, and she stumbles across a mysterious box while searching on the beach. And when she opens it, there's a beautiful hair comb that connects her with a rather dangerous mermaid. And she offers Keela a wish in exchange for returning her hair comb. And the one thing that Keela wants more than anything else is her mom back. So, of course, that's what she wishes for.
Oh, an evil mermaid. This wasn't a box that she found on Carson Beach over in South Boston by any chance? Was it just something floating up from
She actually kind of went across some boundaries that maybe she shouldn't have gone across, and maybe, broke a couple of rules and picking this box up where she found it.
Interesting, fascinating. That's this whole idea of loss when you're a teenager and trying to find yourself, and at the same time dealing with the loss, whether it's a parent, a grandparent, a pet, a friend. I think that's something that a lot of kids can relate to and a lot of kids experience.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that one of the things that, being a teacher, I've seen a lot of my students deal with all kinds of, heartbreak, like you've mentioned, loss of pets, loss of grandparents, loss of parents even. And I think sometimes we think that these tough topics maybe, don't belong in the books that the kids read, that, their stories should all be, totally uplifting. But I think there's a place for these sorts of stories for kids who are dealing with these issues, to see someone going through the same thing, and also seeing how the people around them can help them and support them. And so I think that's why I enjoy bringing this story out.
I've been doing educational magic shows for years, and of course, the topics that school administrators ask me to address are topics like substance abuse and violence and bullying. And that's something that I've heard for the 30 years that I've been doing this. Oh, well, we shouldn't be talking to kids about this, because if we don't talk about it, then it won't exist to them and they won't have to deal with it. And actually the opposite is true. I think that having these conversations, having books where kids can see other characters dealing with these issues and maybe envision themselves dealing with these issues, I think is really empowering.
I believe that too. I think that books are a way that kids can process and learn to empathize with others, process the world around them, process their own feelings. So I definitely think there's a place for these kinds of stories.
Now, before we dive deeper into A Comb of Wishes and your inspiration and whatnot, I just want to ask, as you are a teacher, and one of the things that I did when my kids were in school was, if they suffered a loss, if I was going to be out on the road for a week, I would let my kids' teachers know, because I would assume that there's a chance that this might come up. They might be feeling bad and something, and the behavior might be off. And I want the teachers to understand that there may be something more going on, so that they can deal with it more appropriately and provide my kids the support. Is that something that you would recommend parents do?
Absolutely. In fact, I have that current situation right now, where one of my students, her grandfather passed away over the weekend. And so she, was out of school today, but is coming back, and her dad wanted me to know what was going on, so that, I could help her and just be alert, not necessarily to have a conversation, but to know that, if something was a little different, or if there's something I felt like maybe her parents might want to know, so they can touch base with her, that I could do that. And so I think that's always so helpful, to have communication between home and school. And I think that creates that wraparound support that the children might, they need.
Yeah.
Just all the adults around them are aware.
Yeah. I mean, it just makes so much sense to me. It's like, okay, do we deal with this proactively and let people know what might be coming, and to offer support? Or do we let the kid blow up in school and then deal with the aftermath? Yeah, because you're going to have a conversation about it at some point, and it can be, proactive or defensive.
Yeah, I think even if nothing comes of it, besides the adults are at school knowing, and so, and the child maybe knowing that the adults know, I think that's just as comforting too.
Yeah. And what a great way just to have, like you said, that communication between school and home. If the only time you speak with your kid's teacher is when there's a problem, well, that's a problem.
Exactly. No, I think, I try to keep that open door of communication from, the very first days of school, just introducing myself to them, giving them ways to contact me, giving them, those positive, information when things happen at school, and then also knowing that you can always contact me if there's a concern. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. Now, was there something in your own life or in the life of somebody around you, someone close to you, that inspired you to write A Comb of Wishes?
So I think there are definitely elements of my own heritage and culture entwined in parts of the story. I loved fantasy when I was a kid and just read voraciously, spent all my time in the library if I could. And so when I decided to start writing, I knew that I wanted to write a fantasy. I had some books that I had read that kind of piqued my interest. So there's a book called The Tale of Emily Winsnap, which is a mermaid story, but it's very lighthearted. I love Neil Gaiman's Coraline, which is a little bit scary. And so kind of thinking of those two ideas gave me the premise. But when I thought about the setting and the characters and, everything that makes up, the backdrop of the story and the flavor of the story, that I definitely was influenced by my family. My dad immigrated from Barbados before I was born and moved to Boston, and all of his family grew up here. And so I was raised around my grandparents, my aunts and uncles and cousins who, cooked beautiful, delicious food. And we, had loud and lively music and really had that West Indian culture as part of what I knew growing up. And so, and just very joyful and close family. And so that definitely is the kind of family and the setting that Keela has in the book.
That's wonderful. I grew up in a similar situation. My grandmother lived 3 doors down, and my cousin lived a block in one direction. Another cousin lived 2 blocks in another direction. It was beautiful. It was also annoying sometimes because you couldn't do anything wrong without somebody. I mean, a doubt would come by a stranger who pick me up by the scruff of the neck and go, "Cut it out, Doherty." And I'm like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "I'm your cousin." And I'm like, "Wait a minute." But we don't see that as much anymore, and it's such a beautiful thing. And I know circumstances are different from folks who are much more mobile these days. My daughter just moved back from Baltimore to Boston, and my son is getting ready to move to Florida. So, they're not necessarily their kids won't necessarily grow up with this big close knit family around, but.
Right.
There is something beautiful about those families.
Yeah, it was really special. I mean, that was my primary reason for moving back from, Kentucky, where I taught for a number of years, to Boston, was to have my kids have, those family connections that I grew up with. But I remember that I spent so much time at my grandmother's house that I knew her phone number before I knew my own. So I remember a friend once saying, "Oh, I should call you. What's your phone number?" And I could only remember my grandmother's number, which I gave to her. And my grandmother told me one day, like, this girl called for you. And I was like, "Oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you that."
Those intergenerational relationships are so wonderful. And we've celebrated it a lot here on the podcast because I think especially relationship between grandkids and their grandparents, their grandmothers or grandfathers. There's something magical about those relationships. You have somebody that you can trust, that you can care for, that is older, that is wiser, but they don't have the primary responsibility of making sure that you're following the lines. So you can test things and you can talk to them about things you might not want to talk to your parents about.
Sure. Now, and Keela has a little bit of that in the book as well. There's a character named Miss Innes who is her best friend's grandmother, and they spent tons of time. She's a very close family friend. And when Keela, kind of gets down, like she notices, like her father, tries to do his best, with, the situation they have at home and her mom being gone. But this character just is like the ear that she needs, that she knows that she's always there to listen and make sure she stays well fed as well.
I like that. I mean, it's tragic that Keela loses her mom, but I like the fact that Keela's dad is there for her. I think, and a lot of media today, and a lot of life today, the dads aren't portrayed as people that you can count on.
Yeah, no, they have a very close relationship, and that was important to me. I think there's a lot of, especially like within like depictions of the Black community of like fathers being absent or fathers not being as involved. And, she's got a very loving family. It's in her mind a little bit broken right now and not feeling like she wishes it did. But, he's there, he's listening, and he knows that when he makes mistakes, like they have a conversation at one point in the book where, she asks why they don't talk about her mom very much anymore. And he, kind of admits to her that he was trying to make it easier for her by not doing that, and realized that he kind of was doing the opposite. He apologizes and, promises to do better. And they both kind of agree to each other that they're going to talk more. So that was really important for me to show.
Yeah. Now, I'll be honest with you. I haven't read many books where the mermaid was evil. And so this is a real twist. Usually we think of mermaids as rainbows and riding on unicorns and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, no, I definitely wanted a different depiction. And I guess I would say that she's not so much evil, it's just complicated and misunderstood. She definitely has her emotions that get the better of her. And I think her past, where she's had a betrayal in her past by humans, has definitely made her rather bitter and suspicious of people. But the way the magic works in the book, she's bound by these rules where if somebody finds her comb, she has to give them a wish, and she needs the comb, for important reasons. And so, she'll do this exchange, but she's not entirely happy about it. But over the course of the book, I think she and Keela, there are many commonalities between them that they start to find out about each other. And I think they definitely come to an understanding by the end.
Yeah. Now, obviously, this is a book that I think kids in that middle grade age group would love to read. But I think as a teacher, you might agree with me that anytime families can read together, co-read or read a middle grade novel aloud together, it can be very, really valuable. What kind of conversations do you think families can have if they're co-reading a Comb of Wishes and they're on their way to school or soccer or ballet?
I think it would be great as a read aloud. It's actually very storytelling and oral storytelling is very important to the story. The character I mentioned, Miss Innes, is a storyteller, and the book is structured to have two voices. So there are chapters that are told from Keela's point of view and chapters that are Ophidia, and they have kind of a storytelling frame around them that's very common in the Caribbean. It starts off crick crack. This is a story. And I think so that's a source of, discussion, talk about like, wow, the story is, told in a different way than maybe other stories that they've read. And then I think it's also the things that Keela's going through provide a lot of opportunities for discussion. At the beginning of the book, she, as I mentioned, is grieving, but her coping mechanism is to somewhat pretend, but to display that everything is okay. And she tries not to make people worry. And so those choices that she makes are great opportunities for discussion. And, how do you, is it okay to tell somebody that you're, not feeling, happy about something? And how do you have conversations about grief and loss? And then, some of the choices that she makes when things happen with this mermaid's comb that she finds. So I think there's some really great moments that parents and kids can have conversations about.
Yeah. Now, right off the top of my head, I'm thinking, this would be a great book if a kid just experienced some grief. But I think more importantly, I think that this would be a great book to have and for family to talk about before there was grief, especially if there's somebody in the family that is not feeling, is of ill health, and we maybe anticipate there may be a loss sometime in the future. What a great opportunity for a parent to start sharing, I suffered a loss. I was like Keela when I was lost my grandfather, my grandmother, and just kind of get that conversation going. And again, just to give kids the practice of identifying these emotions and talking about them, letting them know that it's okay to talk about.
Absolutely. And I have in the author's note at the end, I talk a lot about, this time that we're in. So, the book, obviously I've been writing for a long time, and publishing is a very slow process. So by the time something comes out, it's, things have changed, but the, pandemic started, back in 2020, and, now the book is coming out in 2022, and there are lots of things that we've lost, whether or not even it's a person or a pet. I think just the loss of kind of the freedom that we had been used to in terms of, being able, like we talked about, meeting up at Dunkin' Donuts.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of things that kids have had to cope with, virtual school, in that, those are things that sometimes we feel sad about, like, I wish things were like they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, there are a lot of opportunities to talk about, change and like what we can take away from these experiences, even beyond, the loss of a person that we love.
Yeah. Hey, Carnival is right around the corner from when we're recording this, and the West Indies has a beautiful tradition of celebrating Carnival. Can you just take a minute to tell us a little bit about your family's homeland?
Yeah. So in the book, the setting is an island called St. Rita. But St. Rita is not a real place. It's fictional, but it's based on the island of Barbados. And, as I said, that's where my dad grew up and, lived, before he immigrated to the United States. And then he actually went back there after he retired, and he's since passed. But, it's just a beautiful place. I have a lot of family that still lives there. It's a place of, rich music and sounds and culture. And there's so much of the setting of, the book that I almost tried to infuse as a character with pulling all of these elements of the culture, just, soca music and calypso and, the foods that they eat. Miss Innes is a very good cook. And so she sends home, fish cakes and rotis and, all of these things that to me are very familiar, and people who've traveled to the Caribbean, or have, a connection, plantains, might be familiar with eating as well. So that's all really, kind of just like a little bit of a love note to the islands, and that I tried to put into the book.
Yeah. And the islands, if you ever have a chance to get down to any of the islands, they're beautiful and they're so close. They're just a quick plane ride away.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
Hey, Lisa, before we go and I ask you where people can find you online, this was your debut middle grade book. How did you like writing for this audience, and do you plan to continue to write for this audience?
Yeah, I love it. I think I'm a teacher of 5th and 6th grade. So that is, an age group that I loved. And it was natural for me when I decided to, start writing professionally to write for this same group that I spend so much time with in my career. I have another book that is contracted that should come out with HarperCollins hopefully next year. It's going to be another standalone fantasy. So yeah, I definitely will have more stories. People can find me online. My website is my name, lisastringfellow.com, and I'm pretty active on Instagram and Twitter, at Engage Readers. So again, my teacher hat on with my educational handle. But yeah, I would love to make sure that the book finds audiences out there and that kids, hear about it and, can enjoy a story that has a lot of rich culture as well as, some adventure too.
Yeah. And before we go, have your students had a chance to read A Comb of Wishes?
Some of them have. So I, was given some advanced reader copies by my publisher that I donated to my school library. So I would, see kids sometimes with that arc, or somebody would come up and say, I got off the waiting list and I have your book, or I just finished your book this weekend. So it was so sweet. And now that the book has been out, I've had students, I had 2, in fact, today, bring me their hard copies and ask me if I would autograph their book for them. Wonderful. And I'd say, absolutely. Can you wait a little bit so we can get this work done that we need to do? And then I'll take it. So that's been really wonderful.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of A Comb of Wishes, the debut middle grade novel by our guest and my neighbor Lisa Stringfellow. Hey, Lisa, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed being here.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our friend Derek Taylor Kent is returning to the show to celebrate his brand new book. It's called Hysterical Rhymes and How You Can Rhyme Too. Really, really fun interview. You don't want to miss it, especially if you're an author who is aspiring to write rhyming children's books. Don't miss it. Hey, if you are, speaking of authors, if you are an author, please do be sure to check out readingwithyourkids.com. There's an author click here button at the top of the page. By clicking on that button, you can learn how you can be a guest here on the podcast. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy. It gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic book, and it doesn't cost a thing. Yeah, check it out today. Oh, you can also learn how you can submit your book to our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read panel. Find out if they will give your book 4 or 5 out of 5 stars and name it a Certified Great Read. You can also find out about our promotional packages. We can design a promotional package that will include podcast commercials on the podcast, messages to our 75,000 plus social media followers. We can even display your book on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards. Check it out today, readingwithyourkids.com. Authors click here button at the top of the page. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Lisa Stringfellow. Please be sure to check out A Comb of Wishes. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Skylar Strauss, Rory Grady. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.